And the final configuration we have here are the mail classes. A mail class is very simply just a way to assign a number of attributes to an email that gets sent through GreenArrow Engine. If you're using GreenArrow Studio, all of these settings will already be taken care of you automatically, so you won't need to use mail classes. These are only needed if you're going to be sending mail that does not originate from GreenArrow Studio. First, we'll need to give it a name. Next, we'll need to choose the virtual MTA that gets used. We'll give it a list ID. The list ID is predominantly an internally used value for GreenArrow, but if you have a list ID in your application, you could use this to tie GreenArrow stats back to your mailing list in your application. If you're using this on the same system as GreenArrow Studio, it's important to realize GreenArrow Studio uses the A prefix, meaning it uses the letter A and then has numbers following. This means that if you're using GreenArrow Studio, you should use any prefix other than the letter A. When GreenArrow is first set up, we configure it to use the primary domain that you gave us during the installation. If you have additional bounce addresses available, you can add it here and override the default bounce address that's configured. If you need to send a BCC or a blind carbon copy of each message that gets sent through this mail class, for example, if you need to keep a record of every email that was sent, you can add a BCC address here. Here we have the option to add custom X headers. These are the headers that go at the very top portion of the email and are typically not seen by the recipients. Not everybody's going to need to use these, but if, for example, you're trying to integrate with a third-party system that requires you to pass headers to them, you could add those custom headers in here. The exact headers and data that you pass will depend on whatever third-party application you're integrating with. Next, we have the option to toggle on click and open tracking or unsubscribe handling. Next, you have the option to pass a bounce message through to the original return path address. By default, when a message is injected to GreenArrow Engine, GreenArrow will remove the existing return path address and insert its own. That's the bounce address that we looked at up here. By doing this, GreenArrow will cause all delivery failure messages to come back into GreenArrow so that it can be processed and updated in GreenArrow statistics. If you'd like a copy of that failure message to go back to the original return path address that was removed, you can enable the pass bounce messages through, and GreenArrow will still process a copy of the bounce locally, so it still shows up in GreenArrow stats, but it will also send a copy of that original bounce message back to that original return path address. This is a relatively specialized configuration, so if you're not sure what this does, it's best to leave it unchecked. Next, we have the option to change the URL domain. Like the bounce address, when your system was set up, it was configured to use the primary domain as the default. If you've added an additional URL domain, you can change that here. This will cause any of the tracking links to go to this domain instead of the default. Next, we have the option to archive a sampling of messages. This configuration will cause GreenArrow Engine to store 50 emails from each campaign that is sent through this mail class. If you're using GreenArrow Monitor, you can have GreenArrow automatically insert the seed addresses into your campaigns. You just need to tell it when to start seeding and when to finish seeding. We can have GreenArrow convert text-only messages into HTML, or modify HTML-only or multi-part messages. Now that we have the mail classes set up, you'll need to tell GreenArrow which mail class to use for any given message that gets injected. Most often it's passed to GreenArrow through a header, but it can also be set by the injecting IP address or the from address domain. The exact details of this are going to be unique for every single customer. This is something we'll go into great detail on during your installation. So if this doesn't make perfect sense to you at this point, don't worry about it just yet. The system administrator who's working with you on your installation will help make sure that this is all in place before you move into your production sending.